All right, it looks like most people are in from the waiting room, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to November's Missouri Open Door Technology Series workshop. My name is Angelina Alpert. I am a Senior Program Area Specialist at UMKC Institute for Human Development, and this series is co-hosted with Missouri Assistive Technology. Today's topic is assistive technology for caregiving. And for today's objectives, we are going to start with a quick announcement, do an overview of Missouri No Wrong Door. I'll share some tools for caregiving, and then David will share some different types of tools for caregiving along the lines of assistive technology. So for our announcement today, registration is open for Showcase 2026. That is going to be May 5th through 7th in Kansas City, Missouri. Early bird registration is going until the end of the year. I will include these links in the chat as well, but there is a QR code for registration. Or if you visit lifecoursenexustools.org, in the events tab, you can find all the information on Showcase. Two other quick announcements going along with that. Our call for presenters actually closes on the 21st. So if you are looking to get something submitted, you've got 2 days left. There is a QR code there, but again, that'll be on the same page with the registration information. And then lastly, we have our call for sponsors open as well. We do have options for exhibitors. And so all of that will be in the sponsor packet. So a little bit about No Wrong Door, if you're unfamiliar. The goal of Missouri No Wrong Door is to transform the way people access services in the community. So it supports individuals and caregivers to make decisions on complete and accurate information about their options for anyone seeking long-term services and supports, regardless of age, income, or disability. We do have a lot of key partners for No Wrong Door, as the goal is to have a more collaborative system. Missouri Assistive Technology is who we do this series with. And I've mentioned it on the past few, but just a reminder, Missouri did receive another round of funding for No Wrong Door, so we continue to work with the Department of Health and Senior Services on continuing to make the systems and services in Missouri easier to navigate. So with this series, our goal is to integrate services in support systems. So every person exists within the context of their family and their community. And when that person starts receiving services, it sometimes unintentionally secludes them from the family and the community that they want to be a part of. So our goal is to integrate those services and supports throughout a person's life. That way they're able to be a part of the family and the community of their choosing. So that is how we set the stage for this series of opening doors to integrated supports. We have our 5 different types of services and supports, being personal strengths and assets, relationships, community-based things that anybody in the community would have access to, eligibility specific, which are going to have some sort of eligibility requirement, which we have a series on those. That's the benefit series. And then we have technology, which is what we talk about during this series. So a few tools for caregiving. Just to start us off, charting a life course is a framework and set of tools to help you think differently about your vision of a good life, set high expectations, and integrate multiple types of supports. It helps you organize your ideas, visions, and goals, as well as problem solve, navigate, and advocate for supports. So some of the caregiving based tools that we have, I just wanted to share with you all today. So we have ones that are specifically around the family perspective, which gives family members, caregivers the opportunity to fill in tools with their own perspective and so that it's easier to find a balance between the caregiver perspective and what the individual is looking for in their day-to-day life, what their vision is for a good life. We also have tools specifically around caregiver well-being. These are more specifically for a person to fill out in their role as a caregiver. Um, so things like if you had the time, what would you do for yourself or your own well-being? If there are tasks that you could share with somebody else, what would those be? And then specific tools for mapping your supports as a caregiver and a trajectory that includes some specific prompts around your role as a caregiver. The last set of tools that we have are around respite specifically. So there is a full guide on respite, kind of talks a little bit about what respite is, what respite can look like, your options for respite. Um, and then there are a set of tools as well that go along with those to help plan specifically for respite. Um, each of the slides had just a couple of examples of the tools that we have within each of those areas. So these are QR codes to take you directly to the pages that have those tools on it, where you'll see the full set of tools for all of those. And I will put those in the chat as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to David Baker.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Angelina. And all those tools that Angelina showed that are part of the life course are wonderful tools. So if you are not familiar with those, I would certainly encourage you to become more familiar with them because they're just part and parcel of all the things we need to kind of have in our toolbox to be able to be as good as we can as a caregiver or in our support of somebody who needs caregiving services. And by the way, this is Caregiver Awareness Month. November has been designated that, so we were smart enough to align this particular mod presentation with Caregiver Month. So if you know somebody who is a caregiver or you are a caregiver yourself, then thank you very much, or thank them very much for all that they do. Caregivers are often perhaps not recognized to the degree that they should, and the valuable role that they play in taking care of seniors and people with disabilities. So if we move on to the next slide. So while we're kind of talking about caregivers here, who exactly are caregivers? If you go out and you kind of research a little bit, like try to get some demographic information about the number of caregivers, it gets a little murky kind of quick, which kind of corresponds to some of the things anecdotally that I've heard over the years. We know that there are tons of caregivers out there, and they're generally defined as those individuals who are providing care and support to another person who needs help with daily living activities, perhaps due to age or an illness or an injury or a disability. And they sort of break themselves into two categories. There are the family members or friends, also known as informal caregivers, who are voluntarily caring for a loved one. So maybe a child with a disability, maybe a spouse, maybe they're the caregiver for a parent who has developed some issues as they've aged. And then the other group of caregivers that are out there are what we know as paid professionals. So home health aides, personal care attendants, nurses, and it's just kind of, it's a job, it's what they do, and many of them do it very, very well. If you kind of dig down a little bit in all the numbers that are out there, the best I can discern is that in Missouri alone, there are 1.2 million individuals who identify as being a caregiver. So that's roughly 1 in 6 Missourians is in this role as a caregiver. And since we're predominantly focusing in on assistive technology that can assist caregivers who are taking care of individuals who have memory loss due to perhaps Alzheimer's or dementia, when I dug down a little further and looked at, tried to find a number for the number of individuals who are just working with that population in the state of Missouri, who are caregivers for that population, it's somewhere between 200 and 320,000 Missourians. Most of these are going to be what we'd refer to as the informal caregivers, the family members or the friends who are taking care of a loved one who has memory loss in the state of Missouri. So as we age as a population, the number of caregivers, especially the informal caregivers, is obviously only going to increase. And so having tools in the form of assistive technology or the resources through charting the life course are good things for us to keep in mind as maybe this will be something that impacts our own personal lives as well. So if we move on to the next slide, you know, I think most of us generally know this about caregivers, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, you know, what are the types of assistance that caregivers provide? They provide personal care in the form of bathing and dressing and grooming and assisting in toileting. They provide a lot of household support around shopping and keeping a house clean and preparing meals. They do a lot in the arena of health management with medication dispensing, helping people stay up to date on medications, doctor's appointments, those types of things. And these are the three things we probably off the top of our head most often think about. But caregivers are also really valuable for sort of less tangible things or less measurable things, such as emotional and social support that they provide to the individual they're providing care with. And they also provide a lot of advocacy and help these individuals coordinate various services that they need to continue to live the best life that they can. So these are just 5 examples of some of the types of help that caregivers provide. So if we move on to the next slide, why should we be thinking about assistive technology for caregivers? You know, more often than not, when we think about assistive technology, we think about it as a tool for a person with a disability to help them be able to do something they might not otherwise be able to do. And that same, and sometimes we have to kind of expand that definition because assistive technology can be critically important, not only for that individual who has the disability or the age-related conditions, but as a tool or in a sense as a bridge to help the caregiver do their job better. And some of the ways that assistive technology can matter for caregivers is that first of all, it helps increase safety, both for the caregiver and then the individual who's receiving care. A lot of the assistive technology tools, and we'll look at a whole section of these as we go through this presentation, are also very important in the sense of reducing the physical demand, the straining, the potential injury risk that there is part and parcel of being a caregiver. Assistive technology can help support independence and dignity for the individual, and caregivers are always kind of balancing between sort of hovering and providing independence to the individual that they work with. So, you know, if we can find some ways of keeping folks as independent and providing them with the highest level of self-dignity as they age, then assistive technology can be a very important piece of that. Assistive technology also helps provide peace of mind and it reduces caregiver stress. And we'll see examples of that as we go along with some of the technologies that we're going to highlight. And finally, there are a lot of things on a caregiver's plate in the course of a day and all the responsibilities that they have as part of their caregiving process. And the right use of assistive technology in the right situations can help the caregiver save time and effort in tackling these daily routines that are part of what they do as they are providing care. So if we move on to the next slide, we love to talk about categories in the world of assistive technology. And when I was sitting down putting this presentation together, I kind of thought there were 5 categories within the realm of assistive technology that are the primary ones to kind of focus in on in terms of devices that can be useful for caregivers and how they can support caregivers in their delivery of care. So these are safety and monitoring types of devices. There's daily living supports, mobility and transfer aids, communication and cognitive tools, and then caregiver self-care. So I thought it was great when Angelina flipped up that slide that had the tools in the Charting the Life course that are around caregiver self-care. This is maybe something we don't quite pay as much attention to, and it's really important that we do for everybody's best interest. So these are the 5 categories of assistive technology we're going to focus in on today. And if we move on to the next slide, we're going to start with safety and monitoring tools. And in particular, we're going to look at some fall detection devices and personal emergency response systems. We're going to look at various kinds of smart sensors, GPS and location trackers for wandering or elopement, and then some other types of remote devices that are out there. So these are kind of the subcategories that we're going to of the devices we're going to explore here next. So if we move on to the next slide. We are going to start with a handful of safety and monitoring devices. And it's interesting because I think in the last few years in particular, we've really started to see sort of an evolution. These devices have been around for a long time, but it seems to me that there are more companies, there's more focus now on the aging population, and so we're starting to see kind of a nice evolution of more options in each of these sort of subcategories, as well as just higher quality types of devices to help in the caregiving process or for this population. So let's start first with fall detection and emergency response systems. This is always a need. Caregivers, aren't with somebody 24/7. Things happen. There needs to be a way of the individual being able to, the caregiver being notified if something happens to the individual, or the individual having the ability to contact the caregiver themselves. So fall detection and emergency response systems essentially are devices that are designed to automatically get help when a person falls or has some kind of medical emergency. So they're especially helpful for individuals with dementia or memory issues who maybe perhaps forget how to call. So if it automatically is contacting the key people, then that individual does not necessarily have to have the frame of mind to be able to take that step to get help. And so these systems typically come as wearable devices. So we'll see here in the picture, we have watches, we have pendants, we have a little version of this technology that clips onto a belt. So they're very portable types of devices. And they more often, well, actually, all of them have some kind of built-in sensor that can recognize a sudden impact or a change in movement. So, for instance, a fall. And when a fall, for instance, is detected, the device automatically then is going to send an alert on its own. So, again, that goes back to the idea of the person does not necessarily have to have the frame of mind. And if something happens, the caregiver is going to be notified. So, there's, when you kind of look across the realm of all the fall detection and emergency response systems out there, most of them are going to connect to a 24/7 monitoring center, and where a trained operator will then intervene and sort of try to speak to the individual. If they can't make contact with the individual, they'll start contacting the folks that are on the emergency response list. And so that's kind of the way the vast majority of these devices work. We're doing a program through Missouri Assistive Technology that's providing technology to to caregivers in families that have an individual that has memory loss. And one of the most common questions that comes up is, are there versions of this technology that don't necessarily go through a call station or automatically contact 911? And the answer to that is yes. They're a little harder to find. Sometimes caregivers just you don't want 911 to come, or just it's not such a situation that you need all these other people involved. The caregiver themselves just wants to automatically be detected or notified so that they can act accordingly. So just quick, most go to a 24/7 monitoring system. If you are ever looking for one that doesn't necessarily do that or call 911 automatically, there are options available if that's your situation. So a couple other things we have here up on the screen. The first one, if we look kind of in the middle, in the upper section of the screen, that picture is showing a receiver that's plugged into a socket, and then a little further up above the receiver, you'll see a picture that has a couple of sensors in it. So this is a door sensor. It is an example of a number of these that are out there. And the door sensors are probably most useful in a safety sense if there is a fear of elopement. And so the way they work, they're the two little sensors, little contact points are placed on either side of the door. And when the contact between the sensors is broken, it's going to send a notification that's going to come out of this little receiver. And so, and that just plugs into any outlet. What makes this type of technology nice is not only you're getting a heads up if that loved one leaves the home or goes outside for some reason or another, but this is also kind of portable. So maybe they're downstairs, you're upstairs. You can just take this up there, plug it in, and you still have that peace of mind that you will know if that door has been opened. Below the sensor, the simple door sensor, are examples of floor pressure mats. These are also kind of a nice little safety or awareness type of technology in the sense of the way they work is that when you'd have them maybe by the side of a bed or in front of a pair of stairs, in front of a staircase that maybe is a source of concern, or in front of a door. And when an individual's weight is sensed by that floor mat, it is going to send a notification again to the caregiver so that they are aware that maybe somebody is getting up and they need to kind of pay a little bit more attention, or somebody has approached a set of stairs and there's a safety concern there, so they can respond accordingly. A lot of different ways. These aren't necessarily just for floor. Uh, by beds where they seem to be illustrated the most when you're out there looking around. They can be used in several other locations in the home as well. There's always a lot of risk of falling, especially as we age. A lot of times folks that have memory loss will experience some level of sleep disturbance. So maybe they're up in the middle of the night while everybody else is sleeping, and the various kinds of motion activated lights can help prevent falls, and they can also make it a little better for everybody else in the home because that individual doesn't necessarily have to turn on the lights as they're up in the middle of the night. So ways these are used, maybe a couple of them are popped into key rooms like a bathroom or a bedroom, and when the individual is in close proximity, the light will come on. They're usually a very low beam light. They can also be used in hallways to help illuminate the way, prevent tripping or falling situations, and they're maybe put about ankle height along a hallway and every couple of feet apart. And so as the individual is walking down the hallway or down a pair of stairs where these might be, they are automatically activated, and they're providing illumination that can be very useful for helping that person maneuver the house safely. If we move on to the next slides, we are going to look at, in particular, this is all, well, with the exception of the bottom right-hand corner there, where we're going to talk a little about remote monitoring cameras. What we have, the three other illustrations on this page, are all some version of GPS tracking. So folks with memory loss can sometimes have a tendency to wander, and so that is a super big concern for caregivers. We also, that also happens with other age populations as well. And there's been a lot of development in these sort of tracking devices over the years. And they come in three sort of categories, I guess, if you want to put them in that term. The first one are what we refer to as true GPS plus cellular sensors, and these are going to be the most robust. So in the upper right-hand corner there, we have an example of this. I think this is an example that a lot of folks might be familiar with, and these are the Angel Sense GPS trackers. And they'll come as a watch or a pendant, something else that's, well, I'll come back to that other point. So these are designed to do one thing, and that is to keep track of somebody if they are out of line of sight or just out and about in the community, and you want to make sure that they're safe and you can find them in the event of emergency. So the way these work is that there is a geopositioning chip, more or less, that's embedded in this. And then they work with a cellular connection so that they can broadcast in real time the location, which comes to an app that maybe the caregiver has on their phone. And so since they're providing real time location, the caregiver can open up that app and they can identify where the individual is. A little earlier today, this was a discussion I had with somebody we're serving through the caregiver program, and they were telling me some stories of a person they're responsible for who will leave the house in the middle of the night, and it's a very scary situation. And so these are the types of things that they were looking for, this very robust, updated in real time, easy to use type of GPS tracking device out there. But we've also seen evolution on the left hand side, the upper slide there, with the development of a number of personal trackers. So things like the Apple AirTags or the Tiles are all examples of personal trackers. And these are not quite as reliable or as robust as the dedicated GPS trackers, but they can function as a way of monitoring where someone is. So these are versions of the same technology that are going to use Bluetooth, and they're going to rely on being what they refer to as seen by other, in particular, nearby phones. So they basically kind of work by pinging off of other phones that are around. That are around the person who has one of these AirTags or tiles on them. So this means the location isn't quite refreshed as frequently. It's reliant on sort of the number of phones that are around somebody. So if you lose track of somebody in the mall or at a big box store, this might work very, very well. But if you live in a rural area and there's not a lot of people around you, this may not be as reliable of a technology as the traditional dedicated GPS trackers. And then finally, in the bottom left-hand corner there, smartwatches have become sort of a way of also tracking individuals or helping to monitor where they are. And we're seeing built into Apple smartwatches and to the Samsung products, they have built-in GPS and cellular and Wi-Fi, which can send the location. And then there are some other features that are built in, like SOS calling or fall detection. And so these are becoming also another alternative for being able to track somebody and keep tabs on them or find them in a hurry if they have a tendency to wander or elope. The last safety and monitoring area of technology I want to talk about here are are the remote monitoring cameras. And generally what we're talking about here are the off-the-shelf products that are available, such as the Ring cameras or the Wise cameras. You know, there's probably about a half dozen to a dozen of these camera companies out there, and we've been using them a lot for our own personal safety, to maybe monitor our perimeter or our home. But they also have a lot of ways that they can be helpful in terms of providing safety and monitoring of individuals who have memory loss. So, let's use the example of somebody who likes to go out onto the porch, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have that independence, but we need to maybe kind of keep tabs on them because once in a while they get up and they walk off the porch and go visit the neighbor, and they might get confused and not necessarily remember where they are, and we might need to assist them. So if I had one of these on my porch, I could check in real quick in live time, make sure they're still there. If they were to leave the porch, I would at least have an idea as to where they went. Other ways that these are used, examples inside the house, maybe just there might be a room that the individual spends a lot of time in, and we're not necessarily with them there all the time, but we could check in using the remote monitoring that pairs with an app. And if there's some situation we need to maybe provide them with some instructions or check in and make sure they're doing well, all these cameras also have two-way audio. So a number of different ways that these can be utilized, but they do provide a lot of peace of mind for caregivers, and they don't have to be around, sort of hovering around the individual all the time. In my conversations with folks through the caregiver program, the scenario that comes up a lot that has people leaning towards doing cameras are, there are a lot of caregivers who maybe also are holding down a job, or the caregivers, these are the informal caregivers, or these informal caregivers also um, I need to run an errand. They need to go to a doctor's appointment, or they need to run to the grocery store, and they're only going to be gone for an hour, but it can be very stressful not to be there and have the ability to make sure that the individual is safe. So they'll have the camera. Perhaps it's in a room that individual spends a fair amount of time in, and that's where the person was when they left the house, and they can just check in periodically and make sure that they're still there and everything is okay as they run their errand, or do those types of things that they need to do. Of course, with all cameras, there are the issues that you need to discuss around privacy. It's only fair if you can have this conversation with the individual to also kind of describe, we're going to put up some cameras, or we're thinking about putting up some cameras. How do you feel about this? The purpose of these cameras is, those types of conversations are always super important before we go down this road. but they can be the cameras can be incredibly useful in a lot of different situations for keeping tabs and making sure that somebody is safe and secure. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to start looking at some. Oh, I've got ahead of myself there. So the safety and monitoring devices, how do these benefit caregivers? First, and I've sort of touched on a few of these things as we've gone along. They can help reduce caregiver stress and caregiver burnout because they just kind of make life a little bit easier. They provide better peace of mind. They can promote independence for the individual. I don't have to necessarily always be there. The individual can have their own space. They can do their own thing. They can go out on the porch. They can hang out in this room, and I can, still have the ability that if something happens, I can get a notification. I can check in on them. I can make sure everything's all right. And it's that nice balance between independence and hovering, I guess. Overall, they increase safety and security. And, the caregiver also, excuse me, has the ability to balance monitoring with other responsibilities that they might have in the caregiving process or in their own life. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to look at some daily living supports. In particular, we're going to look at medication management, smart home, some additional smart home devices, and then eating and cooking aids. So moving on to the next slide. Just some examples of some of the things that are out there that I would consider to be daily living supports. A lot of mainstream technology is super useful for caregivers, for people with disabilities. All the Internet of Things devices that are out there, the smart lights, smart plugs, smart shades, the list goes on and on and on. But these can be really useful. They might be a little simpler, a little less cognitive load, so it might be a little easier for somebody who has some memory loss to utilize smart devices, or that individual might have some other related issues that have arisen as they've aged and might not be able to reach the light anymore, or have the fine motor dexterity to be able to turn the bulb on and off. So just a couple of examples of how smart lights come into play, but that same idea of simplifying, maybe making it a little less cognitively demanding, we can apply for other types of smart home devices as well. So we have two examples here of medication-related technologies. We have the medication dispenser in the middle, and then we have the medication reminder app there. If you had asked me 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago for that matter, would the world of medication dispensers evolve? I thought, I wouldn't have said that it would, but it is absolutely amazing to me how many options there are on the market for various situations, all around the idea of making sure that people who have medications are taking them when they need to, as often, and that they're doing it safely. And so there's quite the collection of medication devices out there. And they kind of break down into a couple of categories. So they're what we refer to as the basic alarm dispensers. And I don't have one illustrated here on the slide, but these are they can be for a month at a time. They can be for a week at a time. It just kind of depends on the version that you get. And so the idea behind the basic ones is just to present the next compartment when it is time, and the next compartment then is going to have the medication that is scheduled for a particular time of day. And so they usually are accompanied by some kind of alert. Maybe it's a visual alert, maybe it's an audible alert, which serves as a reminder to be able to remind the caregiver that it's time to provide the medication, or if the person is person with memory loss is still capable of reminding them that it is time for them to take that medication. Then there are the locked automatic dispensers, which have a lot of the same features as the basic alarm dispensers, but these are physical lock and unlock at scheduled times. That's how they work. They are set up so that they lock and unlock, and more advanced versions can also provide alerts to caregivers via text or email if a dosage is missed or something else or taken late. So these are just kind of notching it up another level of safety and protection and notification. And then there are what we refer to as the connected smart dispensers, which are connected to Wi-Fi or cellular or Bluetooth, so caregivers caregivers can monitor usage remotely. So maybe you're caring for your parent, and you have a job that you're trying to hold down. You worry if they're taking the medication correct, at the right times and in the, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can utilize one of the connected smart dispensers so you're getting a notification that the usage has been, or the pill has been taken at the time it's supposed to, or not been taken. So you can call and remind the person that you're caring for. So collectively, again, there's a lot of options out there on the market, but collectively, medication dispensers can be invaluable in the sense of helping to reduce missed doses, of reducing the possibility of overdosing on a medication or taking it incorrectly. They support independence. If the person just needs a reminder that it's time for that medication, but they can do it independently. And they also help the provider or the caregiver in providing some oversight, and they improve safety and medication adherence. We have a simplified remote in the bottom right-hand corner. One of the conversations that comes up a lot in talking to family members through the caregiver program is that my mom, my dad, is really struggling with being able to use the television remote. And there are ways that that can all be simplified and make it so that person still can do those types of can operate the television independently. A lot of times these are designed to reduce the cognitive load. They have oversized buttons. They have color coding like we see in this example here, which just basically boils down the remote to the most simple features, the most necessary features, changing channels, increasing audio, decreasing audio, et cetera, et cetera. These have gotten a little bit more complex as time has gone on because the evolution in televisions with smart TVs and cable and satellite and all these things, it's a little harder to pair these up with the TV that the person might have. But on the flip side of the coin, remotes have been a pain for everybody for years, and we're now starting to see the smart TVs and one thing and another, where we can talk to them and change channels and one thing and another. So there's evolution in televisions that is making them easier to use for everybody. But if we have a situation where we maybe don't have the most current version of a television, we still might consider the simplified remotes as a tool to help the individual be able to independently be able to watch television and those types of things. The voice assistants in the upper right hand corner, again, we're talking about a off-the-shelf technology. And so I often say that assistive technology is 10% devices, 90% creativity. I think these voice assistants and how they can be used for somebody that has memory loss are an example of this. So, some of the things that we can do with voice assistants, if we kind of get in there and get more familiar with them and figure out how to take advantage of all their capabilities, they are a tool that can provide a clear and consistent reminder to the individual who might have memory loss. So that is really useful to be able to provide a clear and consistent reminder for taking medications, for remembering to eat, for remembering to drink, that there's an appointment coming up, and the list goes on and on and on of all the ways, all the things that might be useful in terms where we need to communicate with the person, we need to make it consistent, it needs to be clear, it needs to be simple, and voice assistants can serve as a tool. They can also offer step-by-step voice guidance. So maybe I want to make a can of soup, but I have kind of forgotten what the steps are. I could use my voice assistant to walk me through that. Or maybe it's a hygiene thing like brushing my teeth. Again, if we get creative with the voice assistants, we can use them to provide that step-by-step voice guidance. They can help reduce loneliness and anxiety a number of different ways. These are easier to staying in touch with family and friends because you can voice call or they can drop in on you. We can also put pictures on them so that folks can relive memories and just pictures will just kind of scroll through. And then they can be used for listening to music. So maybe I grew up during the Second World War. I love the big band stuff, and I can get a constant stream of good old big band music from the Second World War through my Amazon Alexa or my Google product. Number of these voice assistants out there. So again, I think a lot of us will get these, we'll use them for a lot of things, but I think we sometimes forget that there are so many creative ways that they can be useful. In this case, for folks with memory loss, but for folks with disabilities or our own lives in general. Moving on to the next slide, a couple more daily living supports. Caregivers want to be able to balance, the person's independence with the need to give care. And the more that somebody can do things on their own, the more that they can do them independently, the better we all are. And so, over on the right hand side, just a reminder that we have so many aids to daily living that can help with cooking and self-care and bathing and all those day-to-day activities. And I just have a couple of examples: the one-touch opener and the adapted knife and cutting board of some tools that might enable somebody, if we explore them and match them up correctly, might enable somebody to continue to feed themselves independently, to prepare their own meals, or to work with me in the kitchen so that we're engaged and putting together a meal, or something else that might be going on. Over on the right hand side of the screen, we have a couple of examples of adaptive clothing. This is an area that I'm encouraged by the fact that we're seeing evolution in here as well. But if somebody loses memory, they might forget how to button, how to tie shoelaces, all those types of things. Caregivers also a lot of times will help somebody with bathing or getting dressed, and buttons and snaps and laces can be a real bit of a tricky wiki for some folks, or as part of the dressing and bathing process. And so we're starting to see, fairly attractive, practical clothing come out that uses a lot more Velcro, a lot more snaps. Might be the difference between somebody being able to continue to independently dress themselves, or just make it easier for the caregiver in general. In the middle, we have a stove shut-off sensor. If I was on a sort of a public service announcement, I would encourage everybody to become more familiar with these. This has actually become an issue in my own family with my mother, and so we're trying to get her to use one of these. So what a stove sensor does, it sort of rests in the middle ground between safety and independence. So, we want them to stay folks to stay independent as far down the road as they can. They're still using the stove, but they have some memory loss. So sometimes they put something on the burner and they totally forget and they walk away. Or they forget how long it's been on the burner. They kind of lose sight of time, those types of things. And so with a stove shut-off sensor, what it does is a couple different ways these work. One way is that they can detect presence versus no presence. So as long as they detect somebody in close proximity, the stove can stay on. If they begin to detect that nobody is in close proximity to that stove, the sensor feature will kick in and shut the stove off. They can monitor heat, they can monitor temperature, and they can monitor smoke and act accordingly, and again, shutting off the stove. So they can interrupt power, they can interrupt gas, doesn't matter what kind of stove you have. And then we'll also give warnings to kind of cue somebody in that they've lost track of something that's on the stove. So these are really just nice little safety features that not only might be useful for somebody that has memory loss, but who is still doing things independently, but just sort of in general for all of us, I think sometimes, because we all wander away from something we've put on the stove, and that can lead to all sorts of catastrophes in terms of fires and setting off smoke alarms, et cetera, et cetera. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to look at some mobility and transfers. Oh gosh, I got ahead of myself again. So these daily living types of supports that we just looked at, some of the ways they benefit caregivers. If we can get somebody to do as many things as possible independently, or continue to do them independently, then the caregiver is spending less time on routine tasks. Some of these devices also cause a better sense of safety, and so we have fewer concerns over the safety of the individual. You see the stove sensor as an example. For the caregiver, they also can help sort of increase their confidence that if they have to leave the individual alone for a period of time, that there are things in place that are going to be safe and enable that person to be independent, and I'm not going to have to worry as much. And so they kind of overall improve the quality of life both for the caregiver and the individual. Moving on to the next set of slides. Our mobility and transfer supports. So we're talking things like transfer boards and lifts, wheelchair positioning supports, portable ramps, passenger aids, and mobility aids. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think most people have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about, but I want to highlight a couple of things. We're just put it back on your radar screen. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little about slide boards in particular in the upper right hand or upper left hand corner. And slide boards, in the caregiving process, there can be a lot of strain on the body for the caregiver. And that same strain, physical strain, also can be experienced by the person that we're giving care to. So transferring from a wheelchair to a bed, from a wheelchair to a car, maybe in and out of a tub are all areas that are just prone for something to go wrong, for somebody to get injured, or for some kind of accident to happen. And so, devices like the slide board there is great for, in this instance, transferring from a wheelchair to a bed. It's a smooth, flat board used to help someone move from one surface to another. And so the idea there is that it reduces the amount of physical lifting needed, and it makes transfers safer both for the individual being transferred and for the caregiver. And in some instances, actually, this might be a way of decreasing the reliance on the caregiver. Some folks may be able to continue to be able to do this independently. It just is a safer way for them to be able to do it. Slide boards, also known as transfer boards, I think are a wonderful type of device that's out there that we sometimes overlook. And then the swivel seat in the center there is another example of some technology that's out there that I think gets overlooked and is really useful. We spend a lot of time as caregivers maybe taking somebody to a doctor's appointment. This time of year, we may be taking them to family and friends to visit over the holidays. It can be very difficult to get an individual in and out of the vehicle for a variety of reasons. So the car swivel seat, basically what it is it's a cushion or a rotating seat, and there's two pieces to it. There's the top part, which is the cushion that will rotate 360 degrees, and underneath that cushion is a second part, which is going to stay fixed on the car seat. So I'm working with somebody, and we put them down. We put them safely into the car. We help them transfer into the car. And so they're sitting facing out of the car. And so once seated, the cushion allows me to pivot their hips and their legs into the car, and I'm experiencing less twisting or lifting. It's just an easier process to engage in to get somebody safely in and out of the vehicle. The handy bar is another nice tool that's out there to kind of make the process of getting in and out of a vehicle easier and safer for everybody. And then the floor lift assist on the bottom right hand side is kind of a nice little tool if somebody does take a tumble and they're on the floor and they need to be able to get up. Instead of just grasping for anything that's around them to get a little bit of support, you'll notice that this kind of looks like a little bit like a shovel handle, but it has this really nice wide base on the bottom. So it's a very secure device that just makes it easier, gives them some stability, some support, so that they can lift themselves more safely up and off the floor if they are to tumble, or if, as the caregiver, I'm trying to help somebody be able to get up off the floor, which again can lead to other injuries like throwing out a back or not being able to fully support the person. So if we move on to the next set of slides, just a couple of more mobility and transfer supports. And again, the same thing kind of works through all these devices we're showing. It's about making it less likely there's going to be an issue, or making it less likely that the caregiver or the person we're caring for suffers some kind of injury as a result of transferring or being in a wheelchair or getting in and out of the bath, all these scenarios where we're lifting or supporting somebody that have the tendency to have other things happen. So wheelchair supports, this is more like another PSA. We see lots of folks that aren't properly positioned in wheelchairs, and that may lead to other health conditions, but it also makes it less likely that they're going to be able to maybe engage with devices or things in their environment because they're not properly positioned. So, for instance, they can't get up to the table all the way. Maybe they're slouched in the wheelchair. So, always, make sure that people are positioned correctly. Portable ramps are maybe not, there's a lot of situations where it'd be really nice to have a little portable ramp. We want to get people out and about in the community, especially this time of year. We want to go visit family and friends, maybe have a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner with them. And so, but they have a stair or two. So instead of that being a barrier or four big burly young men who are at the gathering lifting up grandma and taking her into the house, we can do it safely by maybe having a portable ramp we can take to get up a couple of stairs or a little rise or something like that. And then the hydraulic bathtub lift. Bathrooms are, and bathtubs in particular, are safety hazards a lot of times for caregivers. And so if we have tools like the hydraulic bath lift, they can get somebody in and out of the tub more safely. Then I strongly encourage maybe that's something that we consider getting for everybody's best benefit and the caregiver in particular. So moving on, the last sort of category of devices that are person-centered. Oh, gosh darn it, I've done it all three times here where I've forgotten there's a slide about how are these going to benefit the caregiver. I guess my mind's beginning to think about Thanksgiving maybe. So they provide physical relief, which I alluded to on more than a few occasions because we're lifting a little bit less. We're not carrying as much or helping somebody that might be slightly dead weight. So it just makes it easier. These types of things also are really important for safety reasons because they lower the risk of accidents and falls during transfers. And again, that is such a dangerous situation for a lot of folks. If I can move more easily in the home and the community, there's a time savings there. So getting somebody in and out of a car, as an example, if I can do that more quickly, that's better off for everybody. And again, just that overall improvement of the quality of life or the relationship between the caregiver and the individual they're caring for, because it might be able to provide a little more independence for the individual, a little less constant supervision might be needed in some areas on the part of the caregiver. Now let's move on to communication and cognitive supports. So three things we're going to look at, just some simple speech devices, memory aids, and then visual schedules. And so moving on, we're going to start with three things in particular. I labeled this on the left-hand side. You'll see that that's labeled speech generating device. Really, my point in this, it doesn't have to be a speech generating device. It could be a picture board, a couple of other options that are out there. But we sometimes need to kind of focus in. We might have communication difficulties. And so it's always wise to have some type of tool that's available that can help somebody express themselves, some needs, some wants, to ask some basic questions. And this is a really nice little speech generating device or AAC device that I found for about $50 online that does that. You record in the messages, you have some flexibility, but it's a way of, if there's communication barrier, of giving a voice to an individual. Dementia clocks are an interesting little tool that's out there. And so they're sometimes also known as day clocks or memory clocks. So the idea here is that it's a simple, easy to read clock that help people with memory loss be able to understand the time of day, the day of the week, whether it's morning or it's afternoon. In some instances, they'll even provide weather updates. And so that, they've got a clear and simplified display. So some of the ways that they benefit the caregiver, they reduce the repetitive questions. What time of day is it? Is it morning? Is it afternoon? What's the weather? And that's not an uncommon experience with the repetitive questions. They decrease anxiety, sometimes caused by time confusion. and that's always a good thing. And they can improve daily routines in terms of sleep and meals and medication. Again, all just through more or less a simplified, visually appealing, cognitively less demanding version of a traditional clock. As people age, sometimes digital clocks or the traditional hand clocks can become confusing. And so, same idea, only in a form that's more appropriate perhaps for somebody who's older and has some memory loss. And then we have the simplified smartphones. They have a simple, intuitive face. There are ways that the caregiver can interact with it to maybe block calls or limit the calls that a person can make. There's a dedicated 911 button. So again, the idea is to reduce the cognitive load, and you'll see this illustrated where instead of having to dial phone numbers or remember phone numbers or go in and search for a phone number, everybody that this person might want to contact is visually represented there. They can touch, it'll contact them, and then you'll see above there is a separate emergency contact number if they need to contact 911. So, kind of designed with memory loss in mind, obviously designed with memory loss in mind. I mentioned the remote caregiver options that give control over the phone and the phone settings. Some other things that are built into these are, there are some accessibility features. If the person also has some vision or motor challenge, and there's location tracking, which I actually just did not realize till here not too long ago. So the phone's location can actually kind of be pinged and serve as a tracking device as well. And so moving on to the next slide, we want to just talk. Oh, okay. Okay, visual schedules and voice assistants. Just real quickly on these. So visual schedules, we use them a lot with young kids with disabilities. We don't necessarily always use them with older individuals that might have memory loss, but they seem like they would be really useful. They are really useful for that population as well. So the idea here is to outline daily tasks in a simple step-by-step format so that the individual knows what's coming next. And so this can help support independence. And we have an example here where we see that we have the time and we have the date, and we need some assistance in remembering how we get dressed. And so it's broken down sequentially. We've got the picture, we've got the text. I can even designate that I've completed that particular step in the whole process. And this is one that's an app-based one, but there's no reason they have to be app-based. We can make these quite simply with paper and pen and some pictures. But they serve a lot of really good functions for folks that have memory loss because they can be consistent, they can be broken down into each sequential step, sort of tailored to those things that the person we're working with needs in terms of how, putting something together step by step. We've already talked about the voice assistants, and then something I'm kind of watching here are their smartwatches, because of some of the things that we are able to do with those as time goes on. We talked about them kind of being a GPS tracking device, and each time they come out with some new version of the smartwatch, there are some other things that I think are really useful from a caregiver perspective, and these can, they can help with appointment reminders and medication reminders, because I can have audible alerts or I can have vibrations to notify me that I need to, take my medication, or that my friend's coming over, we're going to a doctor today. They can help with daily routine, because I can do alarms or scheduled notifications to help structure my day. So maybe it's breakfast or time for my shower or time for me to go to a walk. We talked about location and tracking features that are in there. They have smart fall detection built into it. It's not. It's for what they refer to as hard falls. So if somebody has to, if somebody sort of crumples, then they might not pick it up. But if somebody takes a hard fall, these smartwatches now have that fall detection and emergency response features built into them. And there are other things that these, as they evolve, are proving useful or have tools in them that can be really, really useful. So if we move on to the next slide. Oh my gosh, it's 1:30. Okay, so let's, in the name of time here, we'll skip this slide, and go quickly through these last couple of slides. Um, and we send the slide deck out so everybody will have a chance to see it. Why don't we move on? Angelina, I have lost my slides on my desk here. Why don't we just quickly get to the slide that is caregiver self-care tools? Okay, perfect. We are good there. Okay, so early on, Angelina mentioned some tools in Charting the Life course has that are around self-care for caregivers. And this is a big issue, and this is an issue we need to spend more time having a whole discussion about. But there is also technology out there that can be really useful for the caregiver. So examples include the two examples here on the screen. The first one are the mental health apps. It can be a stressful job. It can take a toll. Mental health of caregivers is really important. So if you are experiencing anxiety or depression or any other condition as a result of caregiving, there are lots of mental health apps out there, and we've actually done a session this year in the mod series just on some of those tools. And then there are some wonderful peer support groups. There are some that are in person, but if you are not able to attend peer support groups with other caregivers, then there are some online options as well. And so, as the statement at the bottom goes, if you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first, and that's very true in caregiving. So I will stop there in the name of time. We kind of got everything sort of touched on, maybe not as quickly or as thoroughly as we planned, but that'll just be feed for another presentation down the road.
Thanks, David. As David mentioned, these slides in the recording will go out. So if you wanted to look over those last few slides, they will be there. As I go through the last few wrap-up slides, if anybody has any questions or reflections that they'd like to put in the chat, or if they want to raise their hand, I can go ahead and call on you. But I'll go through the last few slides here really quickly. Our schedules for 2026 for both the benefit series and the technology series will be out soon. They are both planned out for the full year, so you'll get everything all at once and can register for everything all at once. So we're super excited about that. And then if you wanted any more information on those tools, I sent the stuff in the chat, but lifecoursetools.com, and that'll be there. Um, and then both David and I's contact information. And thank you all for joining us today. And have a lovely rest of the year. And we will see you all in 2026.